The land had long since dried out. Once this place had been green, not lush, never that, but alive. There had been grasses that swayed in the wind, fences that stood straight, and people who walked between barn and field with purpose. Now, the barn leaned under its own weight. The fence was mostly memory, and the road leading in had no tire marks, only wind-blown dust and the scattered prints of passing animals. The trough sat beneath what remained of the awning. Its wood was cracked, warped by time and sun, held together by rusted nails and stubbornness. One corner had splintered completely, letting what little water it held seep into the cracked earth below. The horse stood beside it, alone, a tall gelding, bay-colored with streaks of gray in his mane. His ribs showed faintly under a coat dulled by wind and grit. Not starving, but weathered. His hooves were chipped. His eyes, though, were clear, watchful, patient. He lowered his head to drink. The water was shallow, clouded with dust, but it was enough to ease the dryness in his throat. He drank slowly, lips parting just beneath the surface, not rushing. There was no one to drive him onward. Nothing stirred behind him. The wind moved across the flat, brittle landscape without interruption. It passed through the grassless yard, over the sagging roof of the farmhouse, and between the ribs of the old windmill that no longer turned. It carried no birdsong, no voices, no promise of rain, only dust. Once, children had played here. Their voices had filled this yard. A boy had climbed onto this very trough, pretending it was a ship. A girl had tied wildflowers to the horse's halter and whispered secrets into his ear. They had raced each other to the tree line barefoot, shouting challenges into the sky. Now, there were only footprints, too large for a child, leading away from the house, vanishing into the dry field. They were old, already losing shape. Whoever made them had not returned. The horse lifted his head, ears turning, listening. Far off, something shifted. A creak, a thump, or just the memory of one. It might have been a door swinging on a hinge, or a loose shutter tapping in the wind. He didn't spook. He had heard these sounds before. Not ghosts, just the land remembering. He stepped away from the trough, water dripping from his muzzle, and moved toward the fence line. What remained of it barely reached his chest. He paused there, looking toward the road that disappeared into heat haze. Nothing came, but still, he waited. Because some part of him believed someone might return. A girl with wildflowers, a man with a cracked voice, anyone with kindness in their hands. The dust swirled past his legs. The wind blew on. The land said nothing. But it listened, and it remembered. There had been a time when water spilled freely from the pump. The trough had been new then, still smelling of fresh-cut lumber. Its corners were sealed tight with tar and patience. The boards had been hammered by a father's hand, guided by the small, eager eyes of a girl who stood barefoot in the dirt. Asking questions he answered with tired affection. "Will the horses like it?" she asked. "They'll drink it dry," he replied, wiping sweat from his brow and nodding toward the windmill. "If that thing keeps turning." And it had, back then. The windmill groaned, always groaned, but it turned. Its rusted vanes caught the prairie wind and sent water humming through the buried pipes, up from the earth and into the trough. It wasn't cold. The water came warm, touched by the depth of stone and dust, but it was clean. It filled the trough to the brim and spilled over into a rut below, where chickens gathered and sparrows dipped their wings. The horse was younger, too. His coat had shone like polished mahogany in the morning light. He had pranced when she came near, always expecting a slice of apple, a carrot stub, or the soft rub of fingers behind his ear. She named him Jonah. He never knew why. Only that the sound meant her, and that her presence came with water and light, and the sound of laughter echoing off the tin roof of the barn. Her world had been small then, no farther than the edge of the property line, where the land rose into a low ridge of sage and stone. She had raced barefoot to the fence post, dared the snakes in the brush, and once rode Jonah bareback, while her father shouted half in pride, half in fear. Her mother had called from the porch, a hand shielding her eyes from the sun. Then came the summers that cracked everything. The windmill slowed, the pump faltered, the chickens scattered. Even the trees lost their grip on the soil, their leaves turning to paper, their roots retreating. Jonah stayed watching as boots grew bigger, voices grew quieter, and the house grew tired. One summer the girl left. Just for school, her father said. Just a season, maybe a year. She'd be back when the wind changed, when the rains remembered the map. But the rains didn't come, and neither did she. Her father followed the year after, his truck kicking up dust that never settled. And now only Jonah remained. Older, slower, wiser in the way that only silence can teach. He still returned to the trough, even when it was empty, even when the windmill stood still. Because once it had held water, and in that water, reflection. A girl's face, a man's hands, a world that hadn't yet been forgotten. He lingered there today, his hooves sinking slightly into the dry earth where the rut had once carried runoff. A crow called from the post. The door of the barn creaked again, and still, no footsteps. But the horse did not leave, because he remembered, and so did the land. The barn doors groaned as the wind caught them. They hung crooked now, half off their rusted hinges, swaying like tired arms too long at rest. Jonah moved toward them, nostrils flaring. The smell of old wood, mouse nests, and dried manure still clung to the doorway. There had been seasons when this place was full of sound, creaking harnesses, boot steps and straw, the soft murmur of a farmer's voice as he brushed a coat clean. Now, only wind moved here. He stepped inside. The interior was half in shadow. A shaft of light cut through a hole in the roof, casting a dusty beam that fell across the center aisle. Dust motes danced in it, weightless. Cobwebs draped from every beam, thick as lace. Jonah's hooves echoed dully on the warped floorboards. The first stall still held his old halter. It dangled from a peg, brittle leather cracked and curled, the buckle stained green with corrosion. He nuzzled it briefly, the scent faint but familiar. He remembered the hand that had buckled it, the firm tug and release, the voice that always said the same thing when it was fastened. "There you go, boy. Let's go see the sun." He missed the sun. Not the light, that still came, but the warmth that had meant someone was near, someone who would walk beside him across the pasture or brush out the burrs behind his ears. The barn sighed under the wind's weight. Jonah moved deeper inside. A chicken coop once stood in the back corner, now collapsed. A rusted rake leaned against the wall. A blanket, moth-eaten and half covered in straw, still lay folded atop a broken saddle stand. And beside it, a pair of boots. Small ones. The girl's. She must have outgrown them and left them behind, or perhaps tucked them away as a keepsake. Dust blanketed them now. Jonah leaned down, breathing over the leather. It held the ghost of wildflowers and creek water, the things she used to carry on her skin. Outside, a thump echoed, the shutter on the farmhouse. Jonah raised his head, listening. Nothing followed. But still, he stood for a moment longer in the barn's quiet belly, among the pieces of a life scattered and stilled. The wind came through the roof like a whisper, stirring the old blanket. A dry leaf skittered across the floor, then vanished through a crack in the boards. Jonah turned. He walked back toward the doorway, pausing once more to look over his shoulder. Not because he expected anything to change, but because part of him remembered when it always did. He stepped back into the light. The wind met him like an old friend, indifferent but familiar. Dust rose at his feet. Behind him the barn sighed again, and above it all the sky stretched wide, vast, cloudless, unpromising, but waiting. The field was no longer a pasture. It had once held color, modest but proud. Tough prairie grass, wild mustard, the scatter of daisies clinging to life near the fence line. Now, it stretched in every direction in shades of beige and bone. Earth, cracked and ridged, broke apart beneath hoof and wind alike. The long drought had taken not just water, but root. And what the sun hadn't dried out, time had. Jonah stepped beyond the last leaning fence post. The wire had long since snapped, curled like a forgotten question around the dry wood. He walked slow, deliberate, the way old creatures do, not from pain, but from caution. The sun was climbing higher, and the wind had begun to change, not in direction, but in voice. It no longer whispered, it rasped. Grains of dust skated low along the ground, peppering Jonah's legs. He blinked but did not stop. The pasture was wide, and at its center still stood the lone tree, a cottonwood, warped with age, its bark split open in places, as if remembering lightning. Half its branches had lost the will to leaf years ago, but a few still reached out stubbornly into the empty sky, clawing for something that had once been there. Jonah moved toward it. He remembered this place. The girl used to climb here, bare feet gripping bark, hands full of sandwiches, notebooks, or nothing at all. She'd sit in the crook of the branches and call down poems to no one, or hum, or read aloud until her voice broke into laughter. Sometimes she'd sleep there. He'd wait beneath. Now, the wind moved through the branches with no interruption. No voice, no presence. Only memory. Jonah reached the base of the tree and stood still. The ground here was packed flat from long years of hooves and boots. He could almost see the old blanket she used to lay out. Bright red and yellow, frayed at the edges. A jar of lemonade. A tin box filled with colored pencils. A sketch of him. Too small, too proud. He exhaled deeply. The sound barely reached his ears. And then, something new. A scent. Faint, but not imagined. Smoke. Not fire, but stove. Pine wood. A trace of warmth rising on the wind from far off. The direction of the road. Jonah lifted his head. It was not much, but it was more than wind. And for the first time in many days, he turned not just from instinct, but purpose. He walked back toward the fence line. Behind him, the cottonwood swayed slightly, just once. A creak of branch, a shift of shadow, as if nodding, as if remembering too. The farmhouse had leaned for years. It didn't collapse, not fully. It tilted, like a man asleep in a chair he never meant to rest in. The paint was long gone, peeled into dry curls beneath the window frames. The front steps had sunk, warped with rot and absence. But the door still held. The chimney still stood. And now, thin, uncertain, smoke curled from it once more. Jonah approached slowly. The smoke was the kind that came from pine, dry and snappy. It smelled like sap and memory. It rose with hesitation, as if unsure it had the right to return, but it was real. He paused at the broken gate. The hinges hung limp, the latch rusted beyond use. Still, he nudged it with his nose, just as he always had, and passed through. The porch creaked under his weight. Weeds had grown through its cracks, withered now but stubborn. The window near the door was fogged with time and grime, its glass still intact, but long neglected. A sound, inside. Not the wind. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Careful, not afraid. Jonah exhaled and stepped forward, stopping short of the door. He waited, head lowered, listening, and then the door opened. Just a crack. A sliver of warm golden light spilled out, painting a stripe across his muzzle. It smelled of ash, dust, and stew. Something cooking, something simple. And there, through the narrow opening, a pair of eyes met his. The girl. No longer a girl. Older, quieter, thinner around the edges like paper left near the sun. But it was her. The shape of her mouth. The tilt of her head. The way her eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in disbelief. "Jonah?" she whispered. His ears twitched. She stepped onto the porch. Boards groaned beneath her bare feet. She reached out, not quickly, not as one greets a dog, but slowly, the way one touches a page, long lost in a book, careful not to tear it. "You're still here?" she said. Her voice cracked around the words. It had been too long since she spoke them. He did not nuzzle her hand. He simply stood, still, as if he too wasn't sure what was real anymore. Then, a breeze lifted. The porch curtains stirred behind her. The light inside flickered, and she moved closer. placing her palm on his forehead, just beneath the old scar where he had once scraped himself running too fast in the pasture. You waited. She closed her eyes. He didn't move. Behind her, the warmth of the fire flickered. The stew on the stove boiled softly. A small notebook lay on the kitchen table, open, a pencil across its pages. And outside, the wind hesitated, as if, for a breath, even it did not wish to interrupt.